You can always tell when a content creator is running out of ideas when they start doing these like top 10 lists about shit that doesn't make any sense. Like top 10 accessories for breakfast, or like top 10 ideas to become a full-time butterfly breeder. I mean, like, what is this shit? Or like top 10 best grass in video games. I mean, sure, there's like a ton of interesting things to talk about, and it's actually like a really deep and intense topic with years of decades of research and tech behind it. But what kind of idiot would actually talk about If we're going to talk about grass, I don't think I can make a video without including Flower, the OG of grass simulators. A beautifully relaxing game where you collect petals in the wind as you fly over, through, and around a beautiful, dense, grassy landscape. The landscape itself is a literal sea of grass, bending, flowing, and churning as the wind gently pulls the grass in different directions. Each blade of grass is unique and can be influenced by the natural wind in the game, or by your own breeze as you fly around collecting petals and breathing life back into the landscape. As your petals dance over this landscape, the breeze you're controlling pushes and influences the grass under it, interacting with the grass that's already being influenced by the world breezes. Pretty cool stuff. These aren't simple 2D planes of grass like you see in most games. Each blade of grass in Flower has its own mesh and geometry. With the endlessly rolling hills filled with millions of blades of grass, you'd think this game wouldn't even be possible on modern hardware. But I think you're going to be shocked to hear that Flower came out in 2009, and then again in 2013 on the PS4, almost a full decade ago. What's your excuse, Arceus? When it comes to grass in video games, I think Ghost of Tsushima has set the golden standard for modern games. Set in the world of feudal Japan, the world of GOT is filled with endless seas of tall, flowing grass. Wind is one of the main mechanics in Ghost of Tsushima, and grass plays a heavy part in its mechanics. Most games we play nowadays have pretty looking grass, but upon closer inspection, it's really just wobbling and jittering, giving the illusion of convincing movement. This is what I think sets Ghost of Tsushima apart from other games. The tall flowing grass in Tsushima moves almost as exactly as it would in real life, and is heavily influenced by Ghost of Tsushima's dynamic weather system, meaning it will act differently based on the weather around it. There's a heavy storm, the grass will shake and bend violently, almost as if it's about to be ripped out at its roots. When the weather is lighter and calmer, the grass will sway gently in the breeze, guiding Jin to his next waypoint. The Tsushima grass just has this movement about it that hasn't really been captured in any other games yet, at least in recent memory. It truly feels like this world is alive, especially how the characters of the world are able to interact with the grass. The grass will bend and get stomped down when players walk through it. Blood will stain the grass if anyone is cut while fighting. Jin will gently extend his hand and touch the grass while he's walking through it. You can even use taller clumps of grass to hide and perform sneak attacks on your enemies. Ghost of Tsushima's dynamic weather system and grass tech honestly deserves an entire video on its own, so keep an eye out for when that video releases. If it releases, I don't know. Released in 2018, Sony Santa Monica Studios' God of War was a masterpiece in cinematics and storytelling. There's no doubt about that. But there was also a lot of really impressive grass and foliage technology that went under the radar. Now, to create movement in grass, normally most games simply scroll a basic noise texture over the grass that affects the world position of the grass to make it look like it's moving up and down. It's easy, efficient, and looks pretty good. However, for AAA games, this method is slowly becoming outdated as it lacks a certain level of, interactivity and dynamics. This is where the team at Santa Monica Studios decided to take it to the next level. By completely enhancing and rehauling their wind and foliage system, Santa Monica Studios ended up with some really impressive results with incredibly responsive and dynamic grass and foliage. So for example, when you throw Kratos' axe through a line of trees, you'll notice the trees bend and shake as the axe flies through them. The grass also bends and sways to give you that feeling that something extremely powerful and fast has flown by, which makes sense. Kratos is a godlike character after all. Shouldn't he be able to move some f***ing grass around? There is an insane amount of tech behind the wind and just everything in general in God of War, and I can't possibly begin to explain it all right now in this video. or even wrap my head around it. But there's a great GDC talk about the tech by Sean Feely if you want to learn more. I'll leave a link in the description. Another reason I think that the grass in God of War and the foliage as well is so impressive is because of the sheer variation in all of the foliage of the game. There are so many different biomes, from the Icelandic styled forests of Midgard to the alien plant life of Alfheim. So the art team had to design, iterate, and build hundreds of different types of foliage to help sell the atmosphere of whatever biome the player is in. This isn't an easy task at all, and I think God of War handled it brilliantly. One of my favorite games of all time. Few games have really nailed grass like Genshin Impact has. Say what you will about the gameplay mechanics, that's fair, but there's no doubt that the team at MiHoYo have made a beautiful game. And one of their crowning achievements are their lush, grassy landscapes. While most AAA games in modern times are gunning to create the most photorealistic grass, Genshin Impact aims for the exact opposite. Taking heavy influence from Ghibli movies, anime, and even Breath of the Wild, Genshin Impact features beautiful and dense grass that can be seen for miles all over its incredible landscapes in varying shapes, colors, and styles. It's the density and interactivity of this grass that makes the world feel full and alive. Each blade of grass will move and interact with the player and its environment. I mean, setting it on fire will create a wildfire that will spread until it dies or it's put out, burning the grass underneath it. Its soft tones and the way the grass blows in the breeze really makes you feel like you're in a beautifully animated anime show or even a Ghibli movie. There's really nothing like standing in a field just outside of Mondstadt and watching the sun set over the grassy plains. Just like most of the grass mentioned in this video, Genshin Impact uses 3D modeled grass to make it look more believable. But the cool thing is that in the distance, the 3D geometry grass is removed and replaced with 2D planes for optimization. Pretty cool stuff. The argument of Breath of the Wild versus Genshin Impact has been around since the games came out, and while I think Genshin Impact is the more beautiful game overall, it can't really hold a candle to Breath of the Wild's interactive grass. It just doesn't, I'm sorry. This stuff is abuse proof. You can set it on fire, pour water on it, stomp on it, and even slice it up with your own blade. There's nothing this grass can't do. And what's even more impressive is that this grass is rendered and generated on Switch hardware. What is your excuse, Arceus? While all of this tech is very obvious when you look at it, there's also a ton of complicated stuff happening behind the scenes that are a little more subtle, like the grass bends out of view when you look up so the camera isn't covered in grass, the random LODs that are used to break up the lines in the distance, and the overall quality and rendering of the grass in Breath of the Wild is truly AAA quality. Built upon the tech of its successor, Zero Dawn, Horizon Forbidden West boasts some incredibly graphically impressive and very creative grass and foliage. The vast alien world is filled with unique and interactive plant life that really helps immerse a player in the world. I really love all the creative variations of plant life you can find in this game. From the amazingly detailed moss to the lush jungle ferns and weeds, and to the grassy plains, there's a ton of creative plant life featured in this game, which is taken to the next level by the amazing cinematic lighting and the sheer density of the plant life that is placed in the environments. The foliage is comprised of much denser message than the first game, and some trees are even destructible, allowing some of the larger machines to trample them over in a fight. The final result is a beautiful, lush, and densely populated landscape that will take your breath away. One aspect of game art that really isn't talked about enough, in my opinion, is storytelling. Through creative use of textures, materials, or even character design, artists can convey a message or story without actually speaking to you or saying anything. The use of rust and damage on a weapon conveys to the player that this weapon hasn't been in use for a very long time, and may not work efficiently as other weapons, like the weapons used in Fallout New Vegas or Red Dead Redemption 2. But what really amazes me about The Last of Us is how they tell a story through nature, through their foliage, and through their grass. I'm so impressed by the foliage in The Last of Us 2. There's just such a huge variety of it, and it's so detailed, and it all interacts with everything in the world. The detail is incredible. You can zoom in and see droplets of water on the leaves and even little pieces missing on the plants where bugs have chewed away at them, as well as veins that run through the leaves if light hits the trees at the right angle. Each piece of foliage feels like it was handcrafted for that exact spot in the game, and makes you feel like each piece of foliage has its own story and purpose in the game. In The Last of Us 2, the details of that foliage tell a story of growth in a dying world, because nature is a war for survival. The old, overgrown forests suffocate new ones trying to grow. And if the new ones end up succeeding and are able to survive, the older trees die. And the death of these older trees end up supporting life and new growth in its own way. As humans, our success at surviving alone has been the downfall for many other species. So from that perspective, humanity's fall and reclamation by nature is a beautiful thing. An incredible message from an incredible game. And most of this is conveyed through its overgrown foliage. Okay, so while I was writing this script, I was really trying to think about the first game that really impressed me with its grass, and I just keep coming back to Metal Gear Solid 3. At the time of its release in 2004, most games weren't even using 2D grass cards in abundance, let alone any grass with any real geometry whatsoever. Grass was just simple 2D flat textures overlaid on the landscape with the occasional patch of grass dotting the landscape. Halo 2, Half-Life 2, Fable, World of Warcraft, GTA San Andreas, and Far Cry were all released in 2004 and had similar grass techniques. What an amazing year for gaming, by the way. 90s kids had it good, man. We're just built different. But despite all of that, Metal Gear Solid 3 was just different. It featured grass that used 3D geometry and interacted with the player as you walked through it. Very advanced tech for a game that came out only 4 years after the 90s ended, man. But in a way, it makes sense why Konami pushed their grass tech to new levels. MGS3, after all, is a stealth game, and one of the main ways you utilize your stealth is by hiding in the tall grass that can be found in basically every level. As a kid playing this game, I always found myself dancing in and out of the grass after taking down a bad guy to evade detection, and having grass make rustling noises and bend and move around my character every time I went in and out made the experience so much more immersive for me. And it wasn't just the grass as well. I distinctly remember fighting this guy called the Fear in a forest and being so horrified and impressed with the amount of foliage density on the ground as you fight this invisible, crazy person. Being surrounded by these huge claustrophobic trees and all the grass and the plants made me feel so trapped and claustrophobic, which was the point of the fight. Very impressive tech for such an old game. Good old Crysis, huh? Does it run Crysis? Haha. Crysis has always been a technical benchmark for the games at the time, and with its incredible lighting, water tech, and VFX, you know the grass is going to be good too. The world of Crysis is filled with overgrowth, and with overgrowth comes tons of unique types of plants that react with everything in their environment. Players, bullets, explosions, everything. On top of that, some of the taller trees are also destructive and will shatter and splinter when hit by explosives or high-powered ammunition. When playing on outside levels, the tall clumps of wild grass bend and sway in the wind, and even the vines and ivy that grow on literally everything has subtle little movements to them, making the world feel full, lush, and most importantly, alive. This really was one of the first games I ever played where I really felt the unseen presence of wind in video games. But the animations and physics of the grass aren't the only impressive aspect. The plants and foliage textures are also extremely high quality and pack a ton of detail into each blade of grass or leaf. I mean, games at the time were still using pretty low resolution textures, but Crysis managed to pack in a ton of density and detail into the foliage. To be fair, anyone who could run this game at the time had an absolute monster of a rig. Crysis developers, the game is optimized, you're just poor. All of this amazing cutting edge tech that exists in these games, and most of you will still never touch grass. So yeah, grass is pretty cool.